Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie. In this video, I'm going to be looking at the week starting on Monday, May the 20th, 2024. And this is a week that runs through until Sunday, May the 26th, 2024. So let me just explain what I'm going to be covering in this video. First of all, I'm going to be looking at the main astrological events this week. I'm just going to do a blow-by-blow account, sort of starting on Monday when the sun goes into Gemini, right through until Sunday, when in fact the Jupiter goes into Gemini right at the end of the week. So I'm just going to look at what I see as being the main astrological events of the week. Having done that, I'm going to concentrate on one event, and that is the full moon on Thursday the 23rd. And I'm going to look at that full moon in detail, and I'm going to try to work out what it's about. It's an interesting full moon because it happens at the same time as an exact conjunction between Venus and Jupiter in the last degree of Taurus. And I think a lot of people are going to be very optimistic about this full moon. And while I can certainly see that there are grounds for optimism, there's also something a bit weird about this full moon. I'm not convinced that it's entirely positive. And I will be considering a few people who might be influenced by this lunation. You can see some of their pictures on the thumbnail of this video. There's Ursula von der Leyen, who I think is President of the European Commission. Then there's Giorgia Meloni, who's the Italian Prime Minister, and Julian Assange, and also Barack Obama. I think these four people might be influenced by this full moon. And when I've looked at this full moon from a perspective of different people who might be influenced by it, I am going to turn to the I Ching. And my I Ching reading is going to be obviously for the whole week, and it's going to be divided into four sections. I'm going to have a general section. I'm going to look at money, then career, and then relationships. And just a reminder about the I Ching reading, it only applies to people who watch the I Ching section of this video. So if you don't want your I Ching to be read, then when you come to the I Ching part, then you can switch your video off. You can stop watching the video because it won't apply to you. It only applies to people who actually watch the I Ching segment. Okay, so let's look at what is happening this week. And what you can see here is a chart for the very beginning of the week, when Monday starts at midnight on Monday. Okay, I've set it for New York, but I just do that out of convenience. And so if you like, these are the start positions. And what we notice is that right at the beginning of the week, the sun is at 29 degrees 38 minutes Taurus. In other words, the sun is right at the end of Taurus, about to move into Gemini. And really, that's how the week starts. On Monday, sun moves into Gemini. If you're interested, it happens just before 2 o'clock in the afternoon London time. So the moon, if you're in New Zealand, moon will go into Gemini sort of very early on Tuesday. If you're in the Americas, it will go into Gemini Monday morning. So that is a big change. It's the start of the breakup of that big Taurus build-up. We start the week with Sun in Taurus, Mercury in Taurus, Uranus in Taurus, Venus in Taurus, Jupiter in Taurus. big build up there in Taurus, but now it's starting to dissipate as the sun moves into Gemini. And, with the sun in Gemini, there's going to be more flexibility. Perhaps you might feel there's a little bit more freedom. We're not going to be completely set on a single road. We might be considering different possibilities, different options, and there might be more scope for changing our mind. And at the same time as this, you'll notice that at the beginning of the week, the moon is at 20 degrees Libra. In other words, the moon is moving into the Via Combusta. And the Via Combusta is the part of the sky that is between 15 Libra and 15 Scorpio. So that means the beginning of the week, Monday and Tuesday, as the moon moves through this part of the sky, things are going to be a little unstable, perhaps. We can't make fixed plans. It can be difficult because things might go wrong during that first part of the week. And so if we expect things to turn out in a particular way, we might be disappointed. Now, that doesn't mean to say that bad things are going to happen with the moon moving through Via Combusta. It's just that they're not going to happen in the way we expect. So if we are flexible, which should be relatively easy because the sun is in Gemini, if we are flexible, we should be able to deal with the unexpected. Now, on Tuesday, the sun is making a semi-square to Mars. And there you can see it. The sun is at 29. The sun will be in Gemini. Mars will be at around 15 Aries, and so they will be 45 degrees apart. So the sun and Mars, both masculine planets, both high energy planets, and so with that sun semi-square Mars, there might be a fair amount of action, and things could be a little bit dangerous. With Sun-Mars contacts, for example, don't play around with flammable materials or play with electricity, or in general do anything dangerous, and don't be too hot-headed. That is a danger with Sun semi-square Mars. Then as far as Wednesday is concerned, the sun moves on, and the sun makes a trine to Pluto. So sun trine Pluto can be a great time to engineer some kind of change. But it's not a square between the sun and Pluto, it's a trine. And so with a trine, things are relatively easy. We can create change, even transformation, without having to put in too much work. Though perhaps there's a warning there. If we put too much energy into something with Sun trine Pluto, things might get out of control. Perhaps only a little bit of energy is required. Put a bit of energy in, see what happens. A bit more energy. I suppose it's you can always say that you can put in more energy, but you can't put in less energy, in the sense that once you put in the energy, you can't take it back. What do they say? You can always take more, but you can never take less. Then on Thursday, Venus conjuncts Jupiter, and there is a full moon. Now, that Venus conjunct Jupiter, on paper, is really fortunate. Venus is the lesser benefic, Jupiter is the greater benefic. Venus is in Taurus, where it's sign of its rulership. So it's a brilliant aspect. It's highly fortunate. It's very lucky. Things should just work. And there's plenty of scope for optimism. But, it's in the last degree of Taurus. It's a strange place to have that aspect between Venus, that conjunction between Venus and Jupiter. And I wonder if it's really going to work out like that. I think that there is a scope there for a little bit of over-optimism and perhaps complacency. And we might think that just everything is fine. And I think things can be fine, provided we're vigilant. I think it's just going to be vigilant, because things can change quickly. And we need to take happiness wherever we can get it, but be ready to suddenly be very alert. But I'll be talking more about that Venus-Jupiter conjunction when I look at the overall chart of the full moon. And yes, there is a full moon on Thursday. We've got the moon is going to be in beginning of Sagittarius, Sun beginning of Gemini. So when you have got a full moon, it's a moment where you can see the truth of the matter. Things really do become clear. If we've been deluding ourselves in the past, now we can see the truth. Or rather, we could see the truth. The truth is available. I suppose some people are just going to ignore the truth, say, well, I want to carry on as usual. I don't want to make changes to my life. Such an approach might be problematic, and it might bring about negative events. Remember, when you get the full moon, the moon moves from being waxing to being waning. A waxing moon is fortunate. It's getting larger. We're on the upside of the cycle. A waning moon is, all things being equal, unfortunate. The moon is now getting smaller. It's past peak of the cycle. It's perhaps a time to be looking towards endings rather than beginnings. So that full moon is going to create a change of gear. I mean, I suppose there's a cultural side to it. I think that in Vedic astrology, this difference between the waxing moon and the waning moon is particularly important in assessing how strong the moon is in someone's chart. Maybe in Western astrology, it's perhaps not quite so important. Also on Thursday, Jupiter sextiles Neptune. That's quite a nice aspect, Jupiter sextile Neptune. Jupiter is very optimistic, and you put it next to put it in a sextile to Neptune. You might be thinking, but things are going to go fine. It's a sextile. I think they could go fine. It's not as bad as Jupiter square Neptune, but we do have to be careful about being over-optimistic. If we want things to happen with that sextile, we do need to put in a bit of work. But I think we're going to be able to do it. Jupiter sextile Neptune, I would have said is a fairly benign aspect. Then we have Saturday, we have Mercury semi-square Neptune. I don't think that's quite so benign. Mercury is about communication, it's about thought, it's about judgment, it's semi-square Neptune. So there's the possibility of misunderstanding a situation or being deceived. Well, I suppose we could do the deceiving ourselves, but we just might not really understand what's going on, and perhaps we should avoid making decisions on Saturday with Mercury making the semi-square to Neptune. Though, on the plus side, I suppose the Mercury semi-square Neptune on Saturday could make us quite sensitive, and we're going to be picking up all sorts of information, perhaps on an emotional and even sort of psychic and telepathic level. So be ready to handle that information and just don't be confused by it. Then on Sunday I make it 15 minutes past midnight, that would be on Sunday, May the 26th, Jupiter moves into Gemini. That is huge. It's a huge event. I'm not going to talk about Jupiter going into Gemini very much here, because I'm going to talk about it in a few days' time in another video. But Jupiter is a slow mover, relatively speaking. It takes approximately 12 years to go through all the signs, and so Jupiter changing sign is a big deal. And I think for some of us it might feel a bit of a relief, because Jupiter has been in Taurus, which has been this very stubborn sign. Taurus doesn't like to change, and perhaps you say, Jupiter, well, how does Jupiter really work in Taurus? Well, Jupiter can work in Taurus. Indeed, Jupiter does work in Taurus, but Jupiter is perhaps thinking more about material gain and being grounded. It's quite a grounded place for Jupiter, something perhaps that Jupiter is not entirely familiar with, but I don't think it's a bad place. Jupiter in Gemini actually is not a good place for Jupiter. It's in its detriment in Gemini. And the logic for that is quite clear. I mean, Gemini is a sign about the basic facts. It likes to gossip as well. Gemini is not into broad concepts. It likes to move around from one thing to another. Doesn't like to get too focused on principles. And Jupiter is really the opposite. Jupiter wants to see the big picture. So Jupiter wants a big picture, yet in Gemini, just you're having to deal with all these different facts and details, and it can be very difficult to find the big picture, because maybe Gemini is just overthinking about it all. So get ready for a change of gear when Jupiter moves into Gemini. Now, I mean, the things going on this week, a lot of them are important in their own way. I mean, Jupiter in Gemini is certainly a big deal, and I will be talking about that in a separate video. But what I really wanted to consider was the full moon. The full moon is on Thursday. That is on the 23rd. So here is a chart of the full moon. So full moon is here. So that's Thursday, May the 23rd, London time, 2:53 p.m. So this is a chart set for London. Now, the positions of the planets aren't going to change wherever it doesn't matter where you set that chart for, whether it's Moscow, Vladivostok, San Francisco. The positions of the planets will be the same, but what will not be the same is the positions of the ascendant and the midheaven and the houses. Now, what's kind of amazing about this chart is at the time of this full moon, there's the full moon, Sun at 2 degrees 55 Gemini and Moon at 2 degrees 55 Sagittarius. There is that conjunction between Venus and Jupiter. So if you regard the full moon as a gateway, at the moment of the full moon, everything else in the solar system imprints itself onto the Earth. Then that Venus-Jupiter is going to be part of the picture. It's going to get through the gateway. And, we don't know quite how long a full moon can last for. Usually, this full moon is not an eclipse, but it should last for at least a couple of weeks, its influence, maybe a month, but, we should perhaps think about 2 weeks, certainly until the next new moon. And that Venus-Jupiter conjunction is going to bring a great deal of optimism, and it can be a full moon when we start to see how good things are. Venus and Jupiter. Jupiter is the greater benefic, Venus is the lesser benefic. And it may be that with this full moon, maybe a particular relationship will show itself in its true nature. And that true nature could actually be good, because I talk about the full moon in terms of seeing the truth about the matter, but the truth isn't always bad. The truth can actually the truth can often be good. So perhaps it will dawn on us that a particular relationship really is working well and we want it to be part of our life. I mean, that is one way in which the full moon can work, and we may perhaps realize how fortunate we are with Venus and Jupiter, with this Venus-Jupiter conjunction at the same time as this full moon. Yet, if we really want to understand the full moon, we have to consider, what does it aspect? Okay, the main thing it aspects, the obvious thing that it aspects, is Pluto. Pluto is at 2 degrees Aquarius, and it is therefore trine the sun and sextile the moon. So perhaps with this full moon aspecting Pluto, we get a sense of our own power. We start to understand what we can do, how we can transform our environment. That is absolutely possible. And the full moon might be highly energizing. So if we've been trying to change something and it's just been hard work, perhaps all that stuff in Taurus has been holding us back. It's just, Taurus can just be a bit stuck. But with this full moon in Sagittarius, and Gemini, obviously moon in Sagittarius, sun in Gemini, we can start to think about possibilities and options. And we can start to realize that if we make the effort, we can create real change. And while this full moon is taking place, as I've just said, we've got Venus-Jupiter conjunction, so that perhaps gives us a positive view. We can be positive about the possibilities of creating real change, and the inertia of the past can start to dissipate. Yet this full moon does occupy a rather kind of difficult position in a way. And for one thing, we need to look at Mars. Mars is at 1732 Aries. Now, that means that the Mars is semi-square the Sun. That means 45 degrees. So Mars is 45 degrees from the Sun. And Mars is also 135 degrees from the Moon. And so that means that Mars is aspecting the Sun-Moon midpoint. It's a very Mars full moon. And that might not be immediately apparent. So when you've got a Mars full moon, Mars on the Sun-Moon midpoint, aspecting it, it's actually semi-square the Sun-Moon midpoint. It has a Mars nature, and it is a full moon about assertion and power and anger. And some people with this full moon, they may realize how angry they are and how much they don't like the way things are, and they might want to create some change. And this actually could be quite distressing when people have that realization. And in terms of the midpoint, so we've got Mars on the Sun-Moon midpoint. Also, we have got Mars is aspecting the Hades Zeus midpoint, and I know that sounds a bit obscure, so let me just show you what that means. Let me put this up on the dial. So just looking at the 90-degree dial for this full moon. Remember, with this dial, what this dial does is it makes conjunctions, oppositions and squares are all conjunctions. And semisquares and sesquiquadrates become oppositions. So if we take the dial and we move this dial round and we put it on, I'll make it a bit bigger. So there you can see, there's the full moon. Now you can see, because this dial makes oppositions into conjunctions, we can see that the full moon has been turned into a new moon. And you can see there is the full moon, opposition Mars. So that tells us that it's potentially quite a, I would say, dangerous full moon, but certainly an aggressive full moon. There's a lot of anger there. And this full moon is on the Hades Zeus midpoint. So Hades is the principle of, it can be about death, it can be about criminality, it can be about bad things. And Zeus is a planet that is, remember, these are hypothetical planets that in the Uranian school, it started at the beginning of the 20th century. These planets were discovered, they were reverse engineered based on events, and Alfred Witte and his co-workers came up with 8 hypothetical planets. Sounds completely crazy, but in my experience, some of them certainly work. I'm fairly confident that Hades works. So I'm interested here in the Hades Zeus midpoint. So Zeus is about, can be about explosions, can be about violent events, can be about gunshots, sudden action. And Witte and his co-workers, they produced this book, Rules for Planetary Pictures. And so the way one can use Rules for Planetary Pictures is one can look up the Hades-Zeus pair. So we look up the Hades-Zeus pair. So here we've got the Hades-Zeus principle. It relates to a number of different things. It actually says not so bad: relaxation, recreation, holidays, idleness, and vice. That's the criminality and perhaps immorality of Hades. But it also says villainness, mean trick, industry, strike, lockout, destructive fire. So we look up Mars on the Hades-Zeus midpoint and the Sun and the Moon on the Hades-Zeus midpoint. So, for example, Sun on the Hades-Zeus midpoint, to be hindered in work on account of physical defects. The man who is subject to hate, who is detested. Soot, remainders from a fire, carbonization, ashes. With Moon on the Hades-Zeus midpoint, military hospitals, infirmaries, sickness of the brain, industry worker. And finally, Mars on the Hades-Zeus midpoint, end of holidays, start of new work, very dangerous acute illness or bad injury, a deed born out of hate, strikers, target practice, battle actions, fires, conflagrations. So from a Uranian perspective, looking at the Uranian school, this full moon is on the Hades-Zeus midpoint, which could be a problem, and it's also opposition Mars. So actually there is something rather dangerous and violent about this full moon, which wasn't immediately clear, though I do understand that the full moon also there is also an exact Venus-Jupiter conjunction at the time of this full moon, and that is very real. I think that there's going to be a sense in which we do feel that we want to relax with that Venus-Jupiter conjunction. And, we can be happy. But I think we do have to have our eyes wide open. So if we find that Venus-Jupiter, there's that Venus and Jupiter conjunction. It might be interesting to look at what midpoints Venus and Jupiter are on. And so, in fact, this Venus-Jupiter conjunction is actually on the nodes. It's aspecting the nodes, and it's aspecting the Mercury-Saturn midpoint. So let's go back to that. Back to the main chart. So in terms of the North Node, so there's the Venus-Jupiter, there's the North Node. So the North Node is semi-square Venus-Jupiter. So the North Node, from a Uranian perspective, is actually about associations. And so with North Node semi-square Venus-Jupiter, this might actually be fortunate associations. And we might feel just very comfortable with some of the people we meet, and we may actually be in a position where we can make some choices about who we want to hang out with, because this Venus-Jupiter midpoint, this Venus-Jupiter conjunction is on the node, and it's also making a semi-square to the Venus, so to the Mercury-Saturn midpoint. And so the way one might interpret this is that this full moon is about being comfortable with the people around us. And the reason we're comfortable is because we're able to make choices. With this full moon, it becomes clear which people can help us and which people are just a plain problem. And so maybe some people we need to get rid of some people with this full moon, because some people are not making us happy. They're actually making us miserable, and they're dragging us down. Other people can really help us and can be a real plus in our lives. And so we can make that decision with this full moon. Who do we want? Who do we not want? And perhaps that's what we should be focusing on. And I suppose I should say that some of the negative things I was saying about this full moon, the fact that this full moon is on the Hades, Zeus midpoint. Okay, that's a point of caution. We certainly don't want to be in dangerous situations. We don't want to be anywhere where there are guns, where there are battles going on. And I think for most of us, it shouldn't be a problem. But in terms of what's going on in the world and the news flow, I think we're going to see that Hades on the new moon on the Hades Zeus midpoint. But what I have done so far is I've looked at the full moon in general without considering where on Earth. So this chart, for example, I've set this for London, for Westminster. And if you set it for Westminster, you have 2:53 London time. Set it for Westminster, which is the government district of London, where Britain is ruled from. You have 29 Virgo rising, 29:50 minutes Virgo rising. That means you've got Neptune on the 7th house cusp. And this may say something about Britain and the rest of the world, and Britain's confusion about dealing with the rest of the world. Neptune on the 7th house cusp. Britain has enemies, and perhaps Britain doesn't really understand who its enemies are and who is perhaps trying to undermine it. And so from a British perspective, it doesn't look great. And we can look at the map, the astrocartography. I think the way I've set this map up is not great because it obscures the east side of the map. Anyway, this is the astrocartography. And so there you see this yellow line. That's all the places on Earth where Neptune is on the descendant. So you see it goes through London, it goes through Western France, goes through Spain, and goes through Africa. So I think that Neptune line does seem to hit the UK, and I think Britain's foreign policy doesn't perhaps look good. I mean, David Cameron doesn't seem to be a very effective foreign secretary. He's been getting his country into trouble by making cavalier claims about Russia and Ukraine, saying it's okay for Ukraine to hit targets in Russia, and that's got him into a lot of trouble. And I don't think he really knows what's going on. So, from a foreign policy perspective, Britain doesn't really seem to know what it's doing. After all, the seventh house cast by Britain's enemies, and I suppose Britain's main enemy at the moment is Russia. But that Neptune on a descendant does seem to be problematic. Now look at this Mars line. These are all the places where at the time of that full moon, remember that Mars is semi-square the full moon. So these are all the places where Mars is on the descendant. And okay, it goes through a load of African countries. It goes through Libya and Namibia. So I mean, it could be something to do with what's going on in Africa. I'm thinking particularly of Libya, but it also goes through a lot of European countries. So let's home in on what is going on in Europe there. So I'm just going to create a map for just a map of Europe. So let's home in on Europe and that Mars line. I think that Mars line could be important. So you can see this Mars line, this yellow line. It goes through St. Petersburg. It's not quite through St. Petersburg, but goes through the eastern Baltic states, Belarus, goes through western Ukraine, goes through the Balkans and Greece. So maybe there's trouble in the Balkans with this Mars on the seventh house cusp. Countries that sort of come to mind, probably Greece. In terms of capital cities, the capital cities which are closest to this line would seem to be, well, Minsk in Belarus. I mean, I'm sure Belarus is always a target of the West. We're desperately trying to perhaps undermine Belarus because Belarus is a firm ally of Russia. And there's Serbia. Belgrade is fairly close to this line, and so is Tirana and Athens. So maybe there's trouble in the Balkans with this full moon. Certainly, that is a possibility. And what else? Let's consider this full moon from the perspective of the United States. And so let's relocate the chart from Westminster to, well, Washington, D.C. Why not? I mean, Washington, D.C., I mean, that's always somewhere to consider, Washington, D.C. So this is the full moon relocated for Washington, D.C. And so Mars is quite close to the midheaven. So the midheaven, North Node the North Node Mars conjunction is close to the midheaven, and I think that we might see this as dynamism coming from the White House, perhaps. The US feeling it has to do something, has to assert itself, though it's not absolutely exact, this Mars on the midheaven. I mean, we got Pluto in the seventh, but it's not entirely exact. But I think with Pluto quite close to the descendant, there's, like in the UK, there's a certain concept of enemies and how you deal with your enemies. It may not be easy, but it's something that the American government is going to be thinking very hard about, whether its enemies are Russia or China or perhaps somewhere else. That is going to be a focus perhaps of policymakers in Washington. We can relocate it even more precisely, rather than to Washington DC, we can go north a little and relocate it for New York. And if we relocate this chart for New York, it is slightly different. It's slightly more intense. And Mars is actually exactly on the midheaven. Pluto is exactly on the descendant. So in fact, if I had to choose one place that seems to be most affected by this full moon, then maybe I'd be thinking about New York and what is going on in that city. And of course, New York, it has financial importance as well. So I think that's certainly a city that we have to look out for. Okay, so those are a few thoughts about the full moon in general, how it might affect the world, perhaps how it might affect us. And I wanted to finally consider how this full moon might affect certain individuals. So one individual is Julian Assange. So I find it difficult to keep track of what's happening with Julian Assange. There is this, there has been this story that maybe he could be released. Maybe there might be possibility that he can do a deal. But I'm afraid I haven't really been following the news about Julian Assange. But we do have a time of birth for Julian Assange, and he has 2 degrees Sagittarius rising. So this full moon is right on Julian Assange's ascendant. So he's got Saturn on his descendant, 1 Gemini, and he's got Sagittarius, early Sagittarius rising. So this full moon, and remember this full moon is also tied up with Mars, because Mars is semi-square, this full moon, semi-square sesquiquadrate, really does hit his ascendant. And I'm thinking that perhaps over the next few weeks we might hear some news about what is going on with Julian Assange. Obviously, he's been effectively a political prisoner for a long time, and I'd like to think that this full moon allows some kind of resolution. This full moon is also hitting. Notice here how he's got a Saturn-Neptune opposition across his ascendant, and that is difficult. And I think this full moon just hits this major configuration in his chart. So I'm hoping that there will be sort of news that maybe he's going to get released, or there's got to be some move. But on the other hand, it could be the opposite. I haven't got the time to really go into real details about what's happening with Julian Assange. Poor Julian Assange, born on July the 3rd. I mean, what a date to be born on July the 3rd, Julian Assange. That's why he's having so many problems with America. If you're born on the 4th of July or just before the 4th of July, it's kind of inevitable that America is just going to be there. You can't avoid the country. And so this seems to have been what's happening to poor Julian Assange. But I think that this full moon may bring a resolution to Julian Assange. The truth may be revealed one way or another. Now, someone else who has got early Sagittarius rising is Joe Biden. So Joe Biden, November the 20th, 1942. He's got his ascendant at 3 degrees Leo, 3 degrees 11 minutes Sagittarius, assuming he really was born at 8:30 in the morning. And so this full moon also hits his Uranus. So Uranus on the 7th house cusp, I suppose that Uranus on his 7th house cusp is sort of Biden thinking about all his enemies, and it's also about things happening to Biden. I think that Uranus on the 7th house cusp with Biden, was about his first wife getting killed in that car accident in December 1972. That's Uranus on the 7th house cusp, and so he's got the full moon on his conjunct his ascendant. I mean, the moon is on his ascendant. The sun will be on his descendant. It'll also be on his Uranus. So that full moon might make Joe Biden more accident prone than usual, but he's also the president of the United States, and it may reflect Biden and his attitude towards America's supposed enemies like Russia and China. And this full moon, he might have a realization about Russia and China and what's going on in Ukraine, and it'll hit his Uranus. And so this full moon might encourage him to do something dramatic, or he may be encouraged by his advisors. So this full moon, I think, could hit Biden in quite a big way. And also, North Node, he's got North Node square his ascendant, square his Uranus. So this full moon hits his North Node as well. So I think for Joe Biden, I think this is quite an important full moon. And so we need to watch what he's doing and watch what foreign policy decisions he's making, or his government's making. And he still has to watch how he goes, because the full moon is hitting his Uranus, so he could be a bit more accident prone from usual. And so that's Joe Biden. And another person, one of his predecessors, who was hit by this full moon, is Barack Obama. Here's Barack Obama's chart. And Barack Obama has, well, at the moment, he's got a Venus-Jupiter conjunction on his IC, and he's got the full moon across his moon. You know, I'm not saying that anything bad is going to happen there. I mean, in fact, having a Venus-Jupiter conjunction on his IC may actually be quite good. This is a time where maybe he'll get some good news, or something to do with his homes. He has lots of homes, doesn't he? Something about his domestic environment. He may be feeling very comfortable. It may just mean that he's happy doing something. But that full moon on his moon, something's bothering him there, isn't it? Although, as I said, it may be something domestic. It may have absolutely nothing to do with his public life. Then there's someone we haven't heard of for a long time, and you probably haven't heard of him if you're not from the UK, and that is Dominic Cummings. He came up. Now, Dominic Cummings, I don't know his time of birth. So Dominic Cummings, he's obviously British, and he was seen as the person who masterminded Brexit. He is fiercely opposed to the European Union. He used to be an advisor, close advisor to Boris Johnson. At the beginning of his premiership, Dominic Cummings was brought in, and he was seen as being this political genius. And as far as Dominic Cummings is concerned, if I've got it right, I mean, I think he just regards the Tories as having completely got it wrong on a number of issues. In particular, I believe he's made some pronouncements about Ukraine, saying that Britain and the West have been completely suckered into helping Ukraine, and that he's used some really some seriously derogatory language to describe Ukraine, and he regards the whole thing as just being a complete mistake and getting involved in it. And he has a Sun-Neptune conjunction in Sagittarius, and it's opposition Saturn, and this full moon hits his Sun-Saturn opposition. Now, it is quite possible that this full moon is stirring something up. I mean, Britain is obviously in a political crisis. It's moving towards an election. The Tories are doomed, it would seem. And yet, Dominic Cummings is a political genius. People must be must be consulting him. There must be pressure on him to do something. I mean, it's too late to save the Tories, but has Dominic Cummings really gone away forever? And it may be with this full moon for Dominic Cummings starts to make him think again. And so we should not write off Dominic Cummings that he's just gone forever. Perhaps this full moon is going to bring him out into the open. I mean, not that he was ever a seriously public figure. He's sort of more of an intellectual. I think he has a blog, but this full moon could have quite a powerful impact on him and could start to increase his influence, but it may not be entirely comfortable for him because he has this Sun-Saturn opposition. You can see that he's got 5 planets in Sagittarius, but it's opposition Saturn, so that could be difficult for him. But again, this is a situation where it may have nothing to do with his public life, may have something to do with his personal life, and we'll never know what happened. Then there is Ursula von der Leyen, the President of the European Commission. We don't have a time of birth for Ursula von der Leyen, born October the 8th, 1958. Just to point out that she has her Mars at 2 degrees 30 Gemini. So the full moon is hitting Ursula von der Leyen's Mars. And so with that full moon hitting her Mars, something's bothering her, trying to assert herself. I believe that there are some people in Europe who do want to get rid of her, who think she's not really doing a good job. I think that's pretty clear. I think she's kind of well above her ability in terms of what she's doing in Europe. I don't know. I always associate, for some reason, Ursula von der Leyen with Jerome Powell, the head of the chair of the Federal Reserve. I always see that both, I mean, I know they've got nothing to do with each other, but I often see that both of them are two people who just are completely over their heads in terms of what they're doing. But anyway, that's just a thought I had. But Ursula von der Leyen with the full moon on her Mars, I suppose she might be huffing and puffing about Ukraine, trying to initiate new sanctions, finding ways to send weapons to Ukraine, all the usual stuff. And of course, she's got Mars opposition Pluto. And so, did I say opposition? Sorry, sextile. Sorry, let me get this right. Sorry, what am I talking about? Sorry, she has got Mars square Pluto. And so that full moon is square her Pluto. So it's really activating her Mars square Pluto. She's going to be desperate to make things happen. And probably relates to Ukraine, I would guess. Finding a way to keep them in the fight. It doesn't matter if more Ukrainians are getting killed. Anything to keep the war going. So that's probably how it's going to impact her, and she might be contemplating one particular initiative. Finally, there is the Italian Prime Minister, Giorgia Meloni. I know nothing about her. I know that she's supposedly on the right, but she's been in, for how long has she been in Prime Minister? For a year or two now. And so here is her chart. I was asked to look at her chart some time ago. I didn't really look at it. And Giorgia Meloni, there's her moon, by the way, her moon at 3 degrees Sagittarius. So full moon does affect Giorgia Meloni's moon. She's just had her Jupiter return as her Jupiter in Taurus. And I looked at the chart. I just felt that Giorgia Meloni is someone who's probably should not be underestimated. That was my feeling about her from this chart. I mean, she's got Saturn rising. I mean, for a politician, having Saturn rising, I mean, I know it's Saturn in Leo, which is in its detriment because it rules Aquarius, but somehow that Saturn rising looks quite strong, has a strong feel to it. And what's particularly good about that Saturn in Leo is it's in a mutual reception with the Sun. So she's got Saturn rising, Saturn in the Sun's sign, and of course you've got Sun at 25 Capricorn. So she's got that Sun-Saturn mutual reception. She's got Mars in Capricorn, Mercury-Mars conjunction in Capricorn, that Mars exalted in Capricorn. And so, overall, I thought that she has a strong chart. And as Italian Prime Minister, it's easy to write off Italian Prime Ministers to say, well, they're not going to last long. But I kind of felt that she wasn't someone to be underestimated. But she does have a full moon on her moon. And the moon can be about the people, what the Italian people want. And I suppose the full moon may represent some kind of realization, perhaps. And she's also got transiting Pluto square her midheaven. So assuming she's born at 6:30 p.m., she's got a midheaven at 2:13 Taurus. So the midheaven is, the way she presents herself. It's her career, how she tries to, how she pushes forward with her ambitions. And she's just had Pluto going retrograde. I think Pluto went retrograde at about 2 degrees 6 minutes Aquarius. So that was pretty close to her midheaven. We don't know precisely where her midheaven is. 6:30 p.m. is rather a round number. But I'm wondering if she's going to look at what the Italian people want and what she's doing, and is it going to be appropriate? Does it relate back to Ukraine? I don't know. But the full moon certainly hits her. I don't think that full moon hitting her moon is particularly dramatic. It doesn't seem to hit anything else, but it may have an impact on her and how she chooses her policy, maybe her foreign policy as well. So that's Giorgia Meloni, and that's it with the astrology. And so what I want to do now is turn to the I Ching, and I want to consider what is going to happen today in terms of what's going to happen today in terms of the I Ching, what is going to happen. And I've just noticed you weren't able to see me. I just showing you charts, and the bottom right was completely blank. I'm really sorry about that. Let's see if I can fix that at all. You should have been able to see me, but you couldn't see me. I don't know. I'm really sorry about that. So anyway, I want to turn to the I Ching. So remember with the I Ching that with the I Ching, you don't have to watch this. If you don't want me to do your I Ching, I won't do it. I don't have to do it. So let me give you the opportunity to leave if you don't want your I Ching to be done, okay? Because it only applies to people who watch this video. Okay, so I asked the question, what will the week ahead be like for those who watch the I Ching segment of this video? And so it's going to start by looking at things from a general perspective. And the first hexagram I got was hexagram 7, which is the army. And yeah, that seems a really quite dramatic hexagram, doesn't it? I mean, really over the top to be talking about the army. I mean, it's just a weekend. You don't need an army to sort the problem out. Well, what the army is about our ability to make things happen, to defend ourselves, and it needn't be literally a body of troops. It can be about our inner force that we don't always want to reveal. We don't have to reveal it unless there's actually a threat, but we're actually ready to apply this force if necessary. And so over the weekend, that is something that we are going to be thinking about. And I think we may feel that there's a situation where we do have to assert ourselves and take some kind of action, perhaps with other people's help, because it is the army. But there is a moving line here, and the moving line, fourth line from the bottom, is moving. And that moving line is indicating that we are going to perhaps reach a stage where we realize that there's nothing much we can do. We're dealing with a situation that we actually can't handle. We simply don't have the strength, and under these circumstances, it might be best to retreat, because if we were to get involved in an actual fight, to get involved in a battle, then things are not going to work out for us. And this is perhaps underlined by what happens when we move that line, when we look at the second hexagram. And the second hexagram is hexagram 40, which is deliverance. So deliverance is about being in a difficult position, and there is an escape route. We can get out of it. And so we need to take that escape route. That escape route is not going to last forever. So the general picture we get for this week is we're trying to engage with something, we're trying to involve ourselves with something, and it's not working out. And we realize that we need to back off. And fortunately, there is a sense of deliverance. There is a sense in which we can actually get out of the situation relatively unscathed. What we mustn't do is just continue battling, because it's unlikely it's unlikely that we're going to be successful. Now, in terms of money, we likewise have a situation where we don't seem to be entirely comfortable with the financial situation. We feel there's something we need to do to make our financial situation better. And we try to muster our forces, and we feel that we can tune into our inner strength, and we can actually make things happen, and perhaps we can get some help. But at a certain stage, as we try to grapple with financial matters, perhaps we're asking for money, maybe we want a pay rise, someone owes us money, maybe we're trying to sort out our own money. As we're trying to grapple with this whole issue, we start to realize that things just aren't going right, and we would be advised to back off. And if we've started to make commitments financially, then with this second hexagram, deliverance, there seems to be a chance that we can get out of these commitments. So if we're involved in a situation that really is not working, we're worried about the kind of financial commitments we've been making, then we have a chance to say, no, I can't deal with this. Might be embarrassing, people might be disappointed, they say, no, but you promised. No, it's actually okay to just back off. yeah, you might get criticized, but you have an escape route. And that escape route, being able to get out of a commitment, is something you should be very thankful for. And so it's like you get close to making a huge financial mistake perhaps this week, but you actually find a way out. Turning to career and work, and if you are working this week, or if you have a job or you have a business, there's a lot that you're going to be trying to accomplish, and perhaps you're going to be trying to accomplish it with the help of other people. And even if you don't have the help of other people, you're trying to bring into play your own resources and your own assertiveness as a way of making things happen. But it might be that at a certain stage you start to realize that you're not covering much ground. And you're starting to see how difficult things are. And that could be, for example, at the time of a full moon. So we've got the full moon on Thursday, and full moons can often be a time of realization, that we just see how bad things are, perhaps, or at least how difficult things are. And we realize that if we were to carry on in this direction, maybe working at something, maybe trying to get some business, trying to make something fit, it just doesn't happen. And if we were to continue in this vein, we could end up making big mistakes, and we might start getting unfavorable attention. And that means it is perhaps a time to just accept that this week, from a career perspective, from a business perspective, is not perhaps going to be the greatest week. And there just comes a moment where we just have to say, well, we can quit this particular situation. And that brings us on to hexagram 40, which is, of course, deliverance. So deliverance allows us a quick escape. So you might think that you're starting to compromise yourself, perhaps by making a few mistakes or misjudgments, but it's okay. You have a chance to make everything fine. It's as if nothing had happened. Almost as if nothing had happened. You can sort of quit the scene, say, well, maybe you'll go back to the battle next week, but I think that you will, in a sense, feel that you have escaped something, but it could have been a very dangerous situation where you could have made some big mistakes in terms of what you were trying to achieve at work, but you decided not to push it through all the way. And so, yeah, it's perhaps about having a lucky escape. And finally, there is relationships. And from a relationship perspective, the first hexagram is 7. It's the army, and the army is not kind of the kind of hexagram you're looking for if you want a sort of nice, happy, friendly relationship. That army suggests that in some way you are having to look after your own interests. And this may be a reminder that some relationships may not work in your favor, and certain people could do you harm. And I'm talking about all sorts of different kinds of relationships. I'm not just talking about one-to-one romantic relationships. There are all sorts of one-to-one relationships you have in your life, but a couple of these relationships could be with someone who is a bit of a rival. That may be what it's about. And so you have to look after yourself, be on guard. Even if you're dealing with someone you know and love, you might still have to be on your guard a little. You know, the army perhaps represents your own resources and your own sense of self-protection. And so you have got your eyes open, and then we get this line moving, and this moving line is about retreat. So if you're involved with someone, okay, perhaps if you're involved with someone, you've been involved with them for a long time, that's perhaps different. But you may realize, if you're getting involved with someone, that it's not working out. Maybe your boundaries feel threatened. Maybe you have to be very defensive. And you may realize that this isn't going to work. And that means you have to back off. So do consider the various relationships you're involved in, particularly the newer relationships, because some of these relationships are showing signs that they are really not working out and that you need to back off. Can you back off? You might be concerned that the other person might be upset, you might be causing an argument, but it doesn't matter, because the hexagram that the army moves to is hexagram 40, which is about deliverance. And so this gives you the concept of being able to get out of a relationship. Perhaps it's a new relationship, but it hasn't been working well, and you can get out of it without any aggravation. Yeah, sure, the other person might be upset, or you perhaps, if it's a business relationship, you'd agreed to do something, but it doesn't matter. If you don't feel comfortable with something, then you can leave. As they say, isn't it, all's fair in love and war? It's okay. You need to do what is right for yourself, and you do have an escape route. Now, if you don't take the escape route, then of course things could become complicated. But you do have free will here. Okay, that's the I Ching. Sorry this video was a little bit disrupted because I think I had not got my face on it on the charts. I had disappeared. Maybe that's a good thing. Maybe you don't need to see me. Maybe it's you don't want to see me. It's just you just want to look at charts, so that will be fine. But anyway, I hope you have a great week, and I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did enjoy this video, I'd be very grateful if you were to like it. If you are not subscribed and you enjoyed this video, I'd be really grateful if you were to subscribe. And if you want to buy me a coffee, there is a link in the description. So thanks again for listening, and I will talk to you again very soon.